These days, we have been hearing a lot and talking about a lot about complexity. So, complexity is having too many goals to meet, a network of interrelated practices, learning loops, several layers, learning from teaching and teaching to learn. Complexity is complex, taking risks, many tensions being in control, this, or knitting all the colors together, or this, but in colors. Complexity is uncertainty. When issues of integration are put into practice, there are tensions.
I'm just going to give a brief outline of the results that we have from our project, learning about teaching argumentation for critical mathematics education in multilingual classrooms. Our research question, the main research question for the whole project, was what supports and what hinders pre-service teachers to learn about argumentation for critical mathematics education. Having synthesised all of the data, we have come up with 4 tensions. I'm going to introduce each of the tensions. You will then see from some of the presentations at our final conference what some of those tensions might look like in some of the data, and then I'll summarise what each of those tensions have to say about pre-service teaching and teacher education.
So this is an excerpt from a group in which one member became silent during the mathematical group discussions. So we listened to their reflection after what did actually happen. And then student 1 said, when somebody says, do you understand, then you get a little that it might be uncomfortable, that you just say yes, because they continue to calculate anyway, so I do not have to say anything really, so I can just sit and say oui.
Several students mentioned in these reflective discussions that they were not good in fractions, or when they wrote these written dialogues that we're not analysing here, that they couldn't make the participants be explorative because they weren't good in fractions. But we have a lot of examples here that actually the knowledge about fractions was not decisive whether it became exploratory talk or not. It was rather if the lack of knowledge was a group responsibility made public and up to discussion for the whole group, or if it was an individual problem where they were just hiding away. So we have some examples to the left when Peter says, can I ask something? Or says, don't you have to times on both sides? Here they are unsecure about fraction rules, but they take still the position as co-investigator and discuss this with the whole group. While to the right, it says, I think I didn't have so much to contribute. I thought it was very difficult, and then it's not easy to say something when you're doing the calculations and I don't understand anything. So this PT is positioning herself as a novice and just hiding away. And then the lack of knowledge about fractions is not discussed in the group and they don't get any further.
So in those examples that you have just seen from some of the presentations, there is occasions where the uncertainty caused the pre-service teachers to reduce the amount of learning opportunities for the school students, or the teacher educators to reduce the possibilities for learning of the pre-service teachers. But at the same time, if we could actually recognise that uncertainty as teacher educators and move the pre-service teachers through that, we did find that the teaching in the practicum was improved. So our pre-service teachers who took on mathematical modelling, for instance, who gave control to the students, they found that they learnt a lot more about what the school students were capable of. So the second tension was to do with balancing the different components that all teachers have to do in a classroom and which we as teacher educators had taken on. So we, in the Latacme project, had 5 different foci that had to be balanced against each other in the work that we did with the pre-service teachers. You'll see just a couple of snippets from our presentation to do with some of those balancing of different foci.
You can of course do modeling and learn about modeling, but in this case we saw that modeling was not just learning about modeling and doing modeling. It's about taking a stand and what we call modeling for lived democracy. So 2 slightly related themes, but argumentation and taking a stand. So 2 quotes, one from Anna and one from Mai. Modeling activity provides tool to student to make argumentation and inquire, to be able to take a stand on societal issue and form their opinion based on facts. Also, modeling can be an excellent way for students to think for themselves, formulate thoughts and form their own standpoint. So this is about argumentation and taking a stand. Related to that is an inquiring human being taking part in society. So Anna said that modeling enables students to take part in society and that we give them the tools to become a human being about who is inquiring and wonders about issues in society. So this shows that modeling is not just learning to model. It's developing students as critical citizens, responsible citizens, and learning to deal with society, problematic maybe issues of society as human beings.
So we think that adding an audience to this task, so they were going to convince an audience, changed the students' behavior because it was not just modeling and mathematical argumentation, they were now trying to use mathematics to convince an audience. And they were therefore, as I've said, evaluating the results based on how convincing they would be, the results would be. While the mathematical correctness of the calculations was not considered in those cases. So what do we take from this? Teaching students the competence they need to formulate their own arguments, as is the goal with the curriculum, is not a straightforward task, obviously. And mathematical knowledge in itself is not enough to make students able to participate in a public debate in a truthful manner, as we must assume that is our goal. However, we also see some pedagogical opportunities. For instance, one can have a whole class discussion after they've worked on their task and then build on their experience of convincing an audience. In that whole class discussion, one could reflect on how the data was used. Were they truthful or not when they used their data to convince an audience? And also reflect on how real data can be used to manipulate, to influence others, as one of the students reflected on.
There were some very strong parallels I saw in this with some misconceptions that we've had in the past 3 decades in the proof research, where people have said a mathematical proof should be defined as a convincing argument. And some people have discovered that that's actually an extremely problematic definition, because convincing can be done in many, many ways. A lot of them are not mathematical proof. So that was a connection I made, and a connection that this happens not only in a realistic context, where you might, for social reasons, want to convince people of a certain thing, but a long time ago, Latacme and Latacme did a study where kids were doing all sorts of things to convince each other of the mathematical truth of false statements, using their social ability to convince.
So what we found in this one again was if that balance wasn't right, then we tended to focus on one aspect above the others. So in regards to language diversity in the classroom, if we tried to focus in on that with the pre-service teachers, if they showed uncertainty about the mathematics, we tended to go back to teaching them mathematics. So then the language diversity issues disappeared out of our awareness. However, if we did focus on this and try and find ways to blend these together, then the pre-service teachers could also see ways that they could blend that together to actually work in classrooms on practicum. The third tension was about getting the balance between the short-term needs for something which had to be done immediately and the long-term needs where we recognise that learning takes time and some complicated understandings took more time to develop than what could be done in maybe one workshop. So here you will see a couple of snippets from, again, the final presentation of our results, which illustrate some of this balance of balance between the short and the long-term needs.
We'll talk about three tensions that I identified. The first one is about my teaching and the pre-service teacher's teaching. So I identified this tension when I was reflecting on what resources, what material I would use in my practice. So I considered, are they relevant for my teaching goals, or are they relevant for the pre-service teacher's practicum, for their needs and for their experiences of teaching? The problem is that when I did that, when I focused on those two, it was difficult to focus on how would these resources and material be used in explicit activities of intellectual work. So I was only justifying the resources, but I was not making the activities. So focusing on these components was making, the implication was that this was not achieved. And also, focusing on pre-service teachers' needs was only focused on what are their needs for teaching the mathematics and not necessarily about teaching in multilingual classroom.
As you can see from those snippets, it's not an easy balance to do, but we did in fact make some decisions in the project. So some of the things of the different foci, for instance, to do with modelling, we only focused on providing the 3-act model to the pre-service teachers they can use on practicum, and recognise that we'd have to come back to it in other courses, in other years. The fourth and the final tension was to do with agency and control. How much guidance should we give to the pre-service teachers? How much guidance did we want the pre-service teachers to give to the school students? And how did that affect ownership of the learning which went on? So again, here's some more snippets which illustrate some of those.
This other discourse that I found was the mastering through practicing discourse. Okay? So PT is referring to, it was only 2 groups out of the 3 that refer to the incorporation of ICT tools as a more playful way to exercise or to practice mathematics after the teacher had explained the topics. So somehow, even if they are solving the problem of the fun, still they are attached to the patterns of traditional mathematics. And so not producing transformative ways of teaching, especially with the focus of the student, the pupils, rather than the teachers and their teaching.
And the groups were concerned with that the students had to be active. make their own choices and work independently. A couple of examples, perhaps. Group 2, that were planning an activity for second grade, discussed how to involve a water basin and the kind of support and guideline the students needed for working with it. The mathematical topic was measuring. They pointed out that the goal with our mathematical modeling activity is that they, or the students, have to find out by themselves, that they find themselves things to mathematize in general.
So you can see that all of these tensions are interrelated. Not one tension stands out by itself, they're all connected to each other. This agency and control was also connected to the long-term, short-term goals, and also connected to where the content focus should be in any particular moment. And that also had to do with being uncertain, because there was a lot of different things that people had to manage all at the same time.